The stream will be starting soon. Thank you again for joining us.
Woohoo, Bobby Conway here, and I am so excited to have the great Nancy Pearcey on with me today. Nancy, how are you?
Good to see you.
It is good to be with you. If you're not familiar with Nancy Pearcey, I want you to be. She is literally one of my apologetic heroes of the faith. I fell in love with her writing through her book, Total Truth, and then would read Finding Truth, and her other book, Saving Leonardo. It's just such an amazing writing gift that God has given this wonderful woman of God. And her most recent book, Love Thy Body, we're going to be talking with Nancy about this today. We're living in a cultural time where there's much confusion. We definitely can see that. And so, Nancy, I'm just thankful for you for the work that you do. I'm just humbled that you would come on this program, and I'm so excited to be able to talk with you about your book, Love Thy Body. What is Love Thy Body about?
So Love Thy Body covers those cutting-edge moral issues of our day, from abortion and euthanasia, homosexuality, transgenderism, the hookup culture. And what I do is I try to give people better tools to deal with these issues. And to do that, you have to go behind the scenes a little bit. Christians in particular are prone to say, the Bible says, and therefore don't do it.
Right.
And they don't really know how to go deeper, either with other Christians and particularly not with secular people. So what my book does is it gives people tools to show that the secular view, which is often presented as liberating, it's all about liberation. It's all about being able to be free to make your own choices. What I show is the secular view is actually based on a very low view of the body. And so it's actually very dehumanizing. So we have to go beyond just do it or don't do it. But why don't we do it? We don't do it because it's dehumanizing and it's demeaning to the human person. In fact, right before we came on, we were talking about a recent Supreme Court decision. This was June 15th. This was the Bostock versus Clayton County. And this was a decision that gave special legal status to homosexuality and transgenderism. And the reasoning they used was exactly what I described in my book, Love Thy Body. They said, essentially, the human being is split between the body and the person. The body tells you nothing. Your biological sex tells you nothing. It's insignificant. It's meaningless. It's not part of your authentic self. All that matters is what you feel, what you feel on the inside, your sense of yourself, your sense of who you are as a person. And so legally now, being male or female means nothing. The law recognizes only your gender identity or your sexual orientation. In other words, your feelings about yourself. And that's essentially what I help people understand in the book is how do we get to this Supreme Court decision? The books, I warn people, these are the ideas that are circulating in the secular world. And now we're seeing them played out.
Yeah, we sure are. And I fear that we're going to see it played out a lot more. And when we think about your book, you cover a number of issues: abortion, euthanasia, homosexuality, transgenderism. Let's begin to unpack some of these different issues as it relates to maybe abortion. As you mentioned, that secular liberalism destroys human rights. Maybe give us some examples, starting with abortion.
Right. So the underlying worldview of all of these issues is a split view of the person. For example, in abortion, secular bioethicists agree now that life begins at conception. You will not find any major bioethicist who denies that life begins at conception. The evidence from science and DNA is just too strong to deny it. So how do they get around that? Well, they say, well, the fetus is biologically human, but it's not a person. It doesn't become a person until it develops certain cognitive abilities, certain level of mental functioning, self-awareness, and so on. And so the split there is, if you can be a human biologically, but not a person, then clearly these are two separate things. So it's a divided concept of the human being that says merely being human is not enough for human rights. You have to reach you have to earn the status you have to earn human rights by achieving the status of a person. And so people think Christians have a low view of the body, that this world doesn't matter. All that counts is the spiritual world. When we get to heaven, we won't have bodies. No, it's Christianity that has a high view of the body compared to secular philosophies today. The secular view basically says you can be biologically human and you're just a piece of matter, basically. And you can be killed for any reason or no reason. You can be experimented on. You can have your organs transplanted. You can be picked apart for sellable body parts, as Planned Parenthood does, and thrown out with the other medical waste. And that's the exact term that they use in the medical journals. Talk about a fetus as medical waste. So that's an extremely low view of who we are biologically, physically, in terms of just our bodies. And Christians are saying, no, you can't do that. We have value and dignity as a whole person, including our body. Our body is a product of, as a creation of God. And so it has very high dignity and status. So I'm giving people tools in Love Thy Body to craft a very positive message, to show why Christianity actually gives us greater dignity and status than the secular ethic does.
Yeah, and I love that you kind of lift the ideal for us and help us to understand what we're arguing for as we seek to give a biblical defense of the body. You also make the surprising claim that there's a common thread, Nancy, that links abortion and euthanasia to all other moral issues, including homosexuality. What's that about?
Well, let me start with euthanasia, because that's more obviously linked to abortion. It's basically the same argument in reverse, right? It's in abortion, it is said your body and then only later become a person. Well, what happens in euthanasia is the argument is if you lose certain level of cognitive function, you are no longer a person. You are just a body, as one bioethicist put it, just a body. And again, as long as you are just a body, you can have your food and water discontinued, your organs transplanted, your medical treatment withheld, and you can be left to die. So again, the argument that is made by secular bioethicists is that being a body has no dignity or status, that they acknowledge, obviously you're still human. When you're, you've lost some of your cognitive functioning, you're still human. So once again, being human is not enough for human rights. And that's what's so dangerous about this view, is because if you can lose your human rights, even though you are acknowledged to be human, well, who's going to decide then? If it's not on the basis of being human, what's it based on? And every bioethicist draws, by the way, and every ethicist draws the line at a different place. You might think, well, it'd be easy to come up with certain cognitive functions that we're all going to agree make you a person. No, read the literature. None of them agree, because it's basically subjective. Once you have separated, torn apart our human status and our status as persons with legal rights, once you tear that apart, you have no objective basis for your definition of personhood. If it's not based on being biologically human, what's it based on? Every bioethicist out there draws the line at a different place. It's completely arbitrary and subjective.
So it really does help when you read your book to get an understanding of kind of like, well, what's going on in our culture? How are people viewing the body? Like, how do they make sense of this? Because if we're going to go out and, contextualize the gospel and engage in conversations, we need to understand our terms. We need to understand these important distinctions so that we can have conversations that could hopefully be fruitful. Nancy, in Love Thy Body, you talk about how, it's your view that of science or nature that will drive ethics for us. What's the connection here that you're getting at?
Well, let's, I think if I answer your earlier question, it'll be easier to see. Let's show how this also links to homosexuality.
Yeah.
homosexuality also rests on a split view of the human being. And think of it this way. Even my homosexual friends agree that biologically, anatomically, chromosomally, males and females are counterparts to one another. That's how the human sexual and reproductive system is designed. When you embrace a same-sex identity, then you're implicitly denying that design. You're implicitly saying, why should my body have any say in my moral choices? Why should my biological sex as male or female tell me what I can and can't do?
Mm-hmm.
This is a profoundly disrespectful view of the body. You're saying, whatever my body, whether I'm male or female, has nothing to do with my authentic self. So I think this is another way where we can kind of turn the tables and show that the secular ethic actually has a much lower view of human dignity, and especially of our biological biological self. And Christianity is saying, no. What we're saying is we want to live in harmony with our body. We don't want to contradict who we are biologically. We want to live in harmony, in tune with our body, in corresponding with our body. I have several personal stories in my book, Love Thy Body. And one of my favorite actually is in the chapter on homosexuality. There's a young man named Sean,
Mm-hmm.
who, his name is Sean Doherty. And he was same-sex attracted from the time he was quite young, exclusively. And the interesting thing about his story is that he was raised in a gay-affirming family and attended a gay-affirming church. So he didn't think there was anything wrong. He wasn't motivated by guilt or shame. Well, I should say, today he's married and has 3 kids. So the question is, what changed him then if he wasn't motivated by shame? And he said, I stopped defining myself by my sexual feelings and started to accept my body as who I was. That God had given me a body, a male body, and I wanted to honor the Creator by living in accord with his design. So it was a very positive motivation. I wanted to honor who God made me to be. I wanted to live in accord with the biological identity that he had given me. And I love this. I find Christians have a really hard time with it, though. Mm-hmm. Shifting the vocabulary from don't do it, it's wrong, it's a sin, and there's something wrong with you. And shifting to live in accord with the way God made you. Live in harmony with the Creator's design. Honor your body, respect your body. That's how we should be presenting it, with these very positive terms.
Yeah, so it's like in Sean's case, his feelings were telling him one thing, but his body was communicating another thing. His feelings were saying, I'm same-sex attracted, but my body's telling me that it's been made for heterosexual sex. And so when you end up in that particular conflict, that's the part where my heart goes out to people who struggle with some of these same-sex attractions. But, how do we help them to kind of work to submit their emotional state to their body? Or what are we telling them there, Nancy? Because sometimes people might recognize that their physical body, yes, it's meant for heterosexual sex, but my emotions want same-sex. And how do you kind of help bring that alignment into place?
So I tell a story about a woman named Rebecca in my book. And she went through about 10 years of being of same-sex attraction. And even after she got married, she was still struggling with this. And so she talked it through with her husband, which must have been awkward.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And he said, look, God made you female, and therefore, no matter what your feelings are, you will ultimately be more fulfilled with a man, because that's how God made you. Mm-hmm. And he said, of course, it goes both ways. God made me a man, and I can be absolutely confident that whatever my feelings are, I will be ultimately more fulfilled with a woman. And that made sense. Sometimes, something clicks intellectually. That made sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the beginning of the change for her.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it took several years for it to change completely, several years. But that was the beginning of the change, is when she said, oh, yeah, God made me this way. And ultimately, I'm going to be more fulfilled living the way God made me.
Yeah, so it's almost like we live in a culture that says, hey, listen to your feelings, act out on your feelings. Your feelings are more important than your body. And so then we become, submissive to our feelings, and we don't really practice trying to submit our feelings to what our body's telling us, to what we could see about our body, that it is created for heterosexual. Now, I'm not trying to say by that it's easy for anybody, that it's not difficult. I can't even imagine what it would be like. I'm not somebody who struggles with same-sex attraction. And so I would never want to minimize that. But I do think that the messages that we're given in this culture, I don't think that people are really given an opportunity to submit their feelings to their body.
Well, the thing is, our feelings change.
Absolutely.
They can and they do. And that's where the idea of sexual fluidity came from. It's the fact that people change. Oh, what was the number? Something 80% of people who came out as homosexual have changed their sexual identity label at least once. At least once, which means for several of them, maybe it's more than once. So, and this is the finding of Lisa Diamond. She's the sex researcher who really has uncovered that concept of sexual fluidity. And she said people just weren't asking. They just assumed that once you made a choice, which direction you
it's go, a done deal.
It's a done deal. And when she started probing, she found out that the vast majority of people who have a non-heterosexual identity are not strictly heterosexual, are not strictly homosexual. For one thing, they flip. They flip back and forth, and that they're. I mean, what I mean is someone who's how does she put it? Somebody who's homosexual will sometimes date or be attracted to heterosexuals, even while still retaining a homosexual identity. And then, of course, the other thing she found is that they also change their identity. So sexuality is fluid, and I think she's totally right. Our feelings can change and often do. What doesn't change and is objectively knowable is our body. People sometimes will say, well, how do you choose, feelings or body? Well, feelings change. Your body doesn't. Your body should be it's an objective, empirically testable measure or marker of your sexual identity. And that's why I think it has priority. You can tell how God made you pretty easily, except for the very small number of people who are intersex.
Yeah, is there anything that you would mention as it relates to that particular moral dilemma? Somebody's in and they're intersex. Do you think in that position somebody can kind of go with what their feelings are telling them the most in leaning toward one or the other? Or how would you advise there?
Well, interestingly enough, most intersex people are clearly male with some biological anomalies, or clearly female with some biological anomalies. So even then, the number that doctors are not quite sure is minuscule. And in that case, people nowadays are saying, well, yeah, let them grow up a little bit until they have some internal sense of identity. But certainly it doesn't prove that there's a spectrum. Most people use people who are trying to argue for that sex is a spectrum, that there's not an easy binary, often will talk about intersex as being sort of in the middle, but it's not. It's not in the middle. First of all, the very, very small percentage. If you wanted a full spectrum, you'd have to have, there'd be more intersex people than male and female, because you'd have to have this long chain connecting the two. But secondly, everyone knows that it's a genetic, chromosomal, or hormonal disorder. It used to be called disorder until that became too politicized. But I had a chance to interview an intersex woman for my book Love Thy Body, What she said is, look, I don't want to be a political football on either side. You know, as a church, as Christians, we should show sympathy and understanding for people who have genetic differences, and not treat them as a football for political purposes either way.
Jeez. Well, I think that when you think about just this whole argument that's put out there, I mean, you have people that will go through a sex change, right? And it's as if they're going through the sex change to try to get their body to match up with their feelings. So it's like, which way are you going to go? Okay, I'm going to have the sex change to make my body to match up with my feelings, or I'm going to try to get my feelings to match up with my body. And so, I mean, basically in Love Thy Body, you know, one of the things that you say is transgender activists are actually estranging people from their body. Maybe this would be a good point to just kind of dialogue about that with you.
Right. It's right in their language. You don't have to dig very far. You know, they explicitly state that there's here's how the BBC put it in a video they did, a documentary. They said, at the heart of the debate is the idea that your mind can be at war with your body. Talk about a split, dividing the body from the self. That your mind can be at war with your body, and in that war, it's the mind that wins, right? Your body is said to be inconsequential. It doesn't tell you anything about who you are. I mean, this is all the way down to kindergarten now. Kids are coming home from school saying, you know, Mommy, am I a boy or a girl? Because having girl parts or boy parts doesn't tell them anymore. I do tell us an anecdote about a young boy who had gender dysphoria. And it was true gender dysphoria. The true gender dysphoria usually shows up in toddlerhood. I mean, it's very early. And he did. Before he was even, you know, he was still crawling. He wasn't even walking yet. And he obviously had, he fit feminine stereotypes. His babysitter said to his mom, he's too good to be a boy, because he was so gentle and so quiet and so compliant. And in preschool, when his mom picked him up from school, he was invariably playing with the little girls, not the boys. And by elementary school, he was weeping. He's coming to his parents weeping repeatedly and saying, I feel the way girls do. I think like a girl. God should have made me a girl. It was very painful. This is true gender dysphoria, where you feel like where you definitely feel like I'm a girl on the inside.
Yeah.
Even though I'm a boy on the outside. So what did his parents do? First of all, they made sure that he knew they loved him just the way he was. There have been parents that I know of who've tried to coerce their kids into being the opposite, into their true sex. A friend of mine in seminary was a former homosexual, and he said, I liked music and art, and my dad was baffled and kept trying to toughen me up by pushing me into more masculine activities like sports. Well, I didn't give his name. So his name was Brandon. Brandon's parents didn't do that. They did not. They said, it's perfectly fine for you to be a gentle, sensitive, relational boy. That doesn't mean you're a girl. You don't have to deny who you are, but it doesn't mean you're a girl. They even took him through personality tests like the Myers-Briggs to show, you can be a male or female and be at either end of the spectrum in terms of personality. They pointed out the gifts of the Spirit are not divided by sex. Prophecy and teaching are not masculine. Mercy and service are not feminine. The scripture says the Spirit distributes them individually just as he wants to. So all of that to say that it took through college for him to finally fully resolve. I was lucky enough to be close to talk with him and pray with him and weep with him. And that's what we have to be committed to doing these days. It's not just winning an argument over ethics. Mm-hmm. It's how do we reach out to these young people. There was a study recently of kids with gender dysphoria. There's something now. This is new. True gender dysphoria starts, like I said, usually when they're toddlers. Now we have a rash of young people, mostly girls, who are teenagers, who are saying, "I'm really a boy." Mm. So they had to coin a new term for that, because that's just not how gender dysphoria typically shows up. So now they're calling it rapid onset gender dysphoria.
Right.
And there was a study done by Lisa Littman at Brown University, and she found that about 63% of these girls already had diagnosed mental health or emotional issues before they came out as trans. In other words, all teenagers have some anxiety and depression. But these kids was so bad that they'd already had to go into counseling and get an official diagnosis. So these are very troubled kids, is the point. And the churches need to be reaching out to them and nurturing them and mentoring them, discipling them and loving them. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm saying it's not just an intellectual argument that we have to be there too, but we have to realize these kids are very, very troubled and they need our help.
Yeah, and it really, as a person who served many years as a pastor myself, I really get burdened by how much we've got to get ourselves equipped to reach this culture. It can almost overwhelm me to the point of like, man, it could shut down a little bit. I mean, the issues with critical theory, critical race theory, LGBTQ, just secularism, pluralism. I mean, we have progressive Christianity. We have to really equip the church. And unfortunately, sometimes people in the church don't want to think, they want to feel. And if they just want to feel and they don't want to think, then we're going to rob people the opportunity of having an informed engagement on the gospel. And that's what I love about what you do, Nancy. You're passionate about worldview. I think about you studying with Francis Schaeffer, going there as an agnostic, and you're up in the Swiss Alps. And I mean, I loved dialoguing with you when we were in Israel, just about your journey to faith. And here you are, this, violin player, you have all these questions, intellectually drawn to things. And Francis Schaeffer was able to give you a worldview to answer the questions of your day. And for years, you have been giving our culture, the church, a worldview to equip the faith. But I shudder to think about like what must go through your mind when you think about how much more we need a worldview today than when you started this journey many years ago.
Well, that actually reminds me of your earlier question about nature, because to have a worldview means you've got to have an understanding that goes all the way back to nature. Ethics always rest on your view of nature because your body is part of nature. And so where did this negative view of the body come from that we see in secular ethics? Whether it's abortion, saying that being human is not enough for rights, whether it's homosexuality, saying my biological identity doesn't matter, and much more so with trans, my body is not part of myself. Where does this negative view of the body come from? It comes from the idea that nature is a product of blind material forces, and therefore it has no intrinsic value, dignity, or purpose.
Right.
Which means our bodies have no intrinsic purpose, and we can do with them whatever we want. In fact, there's an outspoken lesbian who makes this argument very explicitly. Her name's Camille Paglia. And Christians read her sometimes because she's a bit of an iconoclast. For example, she breaks with mainstream feminists who say sex is a social construction. She says, no. It's not a social construction. Nature made us male and female. Humans are a sexually reproducing species. So you ask her, well, then how can you be lesbian?
Right.
And listen to how she answers it. She says, why not defy nature? And here's an exact quote. Fate, not God, gave us this flesh. We have absolute claim to our bodies and may do with them as we see fit. Logically, she's absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
If the universe, the physical world, has no intrinsic purpose, we can impose whatever purpose we choose. So that's really, when you talk about understanding the worldview, this is sort of the underlying worldview for the secular ethics, is that our bodies are products of blind forces and have no intrinsic dignity. And this is sort of really at the heart, this is the heart of the issue. Do we live in a cosmos operating by blind, purposeless, mindless forces, or do we live in a cosmos created by a loving God because he loves us and who has a purpose for our lives? That's really, when we talk about these issues, we should always come back to that. And that, again, that helps people to see that Christianity is not being negative here, it's being positive.
Yeah, you can almost hear a little bit of Nietzschean influence on her, this will to power, pull the boots up, just get after, create your own vision, Ubermensch, Superman, overcomer, here we go, in the way that you just laid out her vision. We're going to run contrary to nature. Another question that I would ask as it relates to your book, you talk about this unexpected link that emerges between transgenderism and the environmental movement. What's going on here? Because that is an unsuspected link right there.
I was surprised to find how persuasive people find that. Both my secular friends and my Christian friends. Basically, what we've learned from the environmental movement is that if we want to avoid ecological disasters and pollution and so on, we have to work with the structure of nature. We cannot do as we see fit, to use Camille Paglia's words, when it comes to the environment. We have to respect the structure that's there. It doesn't mean you can't intervene, but as you intervene, you have to respect the structure that's there. And what Christians are saying is we need to respect our biological structure as well. We need to work with our bodies, not against them. And when secular people hear that, they say, "Oh, okay, I get it." Just like you have to work with the trees out there if you want them to thrive. You have to figure out what's the laws of their inner nature and work with it. And it's the same with us. If we want to thrive, we have to find out what is the inner structure of our nature and work with it.
So Nancy, I mean, there could be people out there that, they're familiar with the puritanical history of Christianity, maybe some of Augustine's confessions where, he was just down on his body a little bit, confessing, how his body, just was living out of control, giving into his lusts. And, there could be people saying the negative view of the body in Western culture, it's not the product of secularism, but rather this is a product of Christianity. And then yet you're contending that, hey, Christian view of the body it's a high view. It's a valued view. It's very valuable. And yet it seems as if there's been certain parts of our church history that devalued the body. How do you put that together?
Basically, it's because people like Augustine were influenced by Platonism. See, the early church was born into a culture that also demeaned the body, though for very different reasons. The early church faced isms like Gnosticism and Platonism, Manichaeism. Augustine was a Manichae originally. And all of these isms treated this world, the material world, the physical world, as a realm of death, decay, and destruction. And they portrayed salvation as escape from this world. Plato even called the body the prison house of the soul. And when the earliest church fathers stood against this, by the way, they said, no. Gnosticism also taught that this world was created by an evil god, a low-level deity. They had several levels of deity.
Demiurge.
That's right, the demiurge. And And that was a low-level God, in fact, an evil God, because no good God would get his hands dirty mucking about with matter.
Yeah.
And so Christianity actually was very revolutionary because it said, no, this world was created by the supreme deity who is a good God. And therefore, it's intrinsically good. But the real scandal of Christianity was the incarnation, the idea that that same good God not only created the world, but entered into the world and took on a physical body. Mm-hmm. For the Greeks, the Romans at that time, that was truly scandalous. And then when Jesus was executed on a Roman cross, we might say he did escape the physical realm, as the Gnostics taught we should aspire to do. But what did he do then? He came back, right, in a physical body. Mm-hmm. To the ancient Greeks, this was not spiritual progress. That was, as Paul puts it, this was foolishness to the Greeks. Mm-hmm. The idea of a physical resurrection. And at the end of time, God's not going to scrap the material world as if he made a mistake the first time around. Oops, let's try something different. No, he's going to renew and restore this realm, this new heavens and a new earth. And we will live on that new earth with restored physical bodies. People sometimes think Christianity is about going to heaven and not having a body. No, that's just a stopping point. The ultimate goal is to live in new bodies in a new heaven and a new earth. So what Christians need to realize is this is an amazingly high view of the physical world. There is nothing like it in any other philosophy or religion. We should be so excited and so happy that we have this marvelous message. The good news doesn't start with Jesus died for your sins. The good news starts with God created the heavens and the earth, and it has incredible value and significance because of that.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I think that if we as Christians could understand, this idea of, creation, fall, redemption, restoration, and understand this worldview, it'll really help us to articulate what's going on. I mean, this is where worldview experts like yourself, Nancy, I just wish for all churches to really be paying attention to books that you've written, Total Truth, Finding Truth, Saving Leonardo, Love Thy Body. These are books that will help give churches a worldview, and it'll give them a language to make sense of some of the confusion that they're feeling internally in this time. In Love Thy Body, you argue that with the law today, it no longer even recognizes biology, only personhood. And it doesn't recognize sex. So I guess in a culture where law is only kind of recognizing gender, what kind of issues is this going to have in our culture today?
Yes, when I wrote that, we didn't have the Supreme Court decision that explicitly said that. I was pointing out that this is the direction we're going. You see, let me clarify by kind of going back. In abortion, the law says you are not a person until the law says you're a person.
Right.
You can be biologically human, but not a person. And so the law does not recognize your personhood. It does not grant you or recognize any human rights, until the law has decided that you are a person. Mm-hmm. So it has basically said being biologically human doesn't matter. Same thing with euthanasia. And by the way, I said earlier that bioethicists all disagree on what constitutes a person. Well, ultimately, whoever has the power is going to make that decision, which means,
right.
So the state will ultimately decide. Euthanasia, same thing. You're no longer a person if you lose certain cognitive functioning. And so again, it's saying, I don't care if you're biologically human still. We're deciding whether you have the right to life, whether you have status of a personhood. And that's what makes you, that's what we will recognize in law as your personhood, not your biology. When it comes to homosexuality, basically, if the law is going to treat a same-sex attracted person, the same sex, let's take a woman, a lesbian, the same as a biological woman, essentially the law has to say your body doesn't matter. All that matters is your feelings.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's another example where the law is saying your biology, we're not going to even recognize your body in the law. Parenthood used to be based on biological bonds, right? I mean, the woman carries the baby. Both husband and wife have contributed biologically their DNA, and obviously there are times when adoption is a great thing, but then it's modeled on biological parenthood, and you have to go through a long and expensive process. So same-sex couples didn't want to go through a process of adopting. They wanted to be treated exactly the same as heterosexual couples. Well, the only way the law can treat a same-sex couple the same as an opposite-sex couple is to say sex doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Being biologically male or female, it doesn't matter. All that matters is your emotional connection to a person, which is exactly what Justice Kennedy said in Obergefell, which, legalized same-sex marriage. He basically said, biology does not matter. All that matters is that you have a commitment to somebody. So again, there's an example where the law is saying your biology has no legal significance. And there was a Supreme Court decision in 2017, by the way, that made that the law of the land. That now, if you are legally married to somebody of the same sex, and you have a child, however you have the child, whether it's adoption or artificial insemination, whatever. If you are legally married, then you are automatically that child's parent, even if you have no biological connection. So there's that the dismissal of biology. We now have a Supreme Court decision on that. And then we're ending where we started. The Bostock decision just put it in terms of transgender. It applies both to homosexuals and transgenderism, but it's more significant, I think, for transgenders because we did not have a Supreme Court decision on that yet. So this is the first time that we have a Supreme Court decision. And once again, it is basically treating us as this article that was in the Wall Street Journal says, treating us like we are ghosts in the machine. You've heard that term, right? Ghost in the machine from Descartes.
Yep.
So, of course, I use it a lot in my book as well. But we're ghosts of the machine. So the machine doesn't matter. It's just a machine anyway. Yeah. All that matters is the mind, the feelings. So, yes, we are having more and more that this is being written to the law that you have no rights based on your physical being, your biology, your biological sex. All your rights are based on your feelings, which of course are totally subjective and easily change. And that's not an empirically testable fact. So it's going to make a litigation really difficult. There's a growing group of detransitioners. Detransitioners are people who transition, made a transition of some kind to the opposite sex, or and it could be just social transition, or it can be some physical transition, and then they decided to detransition back to their original sex. Let me give you one example. This came out after my book, so it's not in there. But there was she was 14 when she was interviewed. She was 14 years old. Mm-hmm. And she had transitioned to boy at age 11 and had lived for 3 years as a trans boy and then embraced her identity as a girl. And in this interview, she said, the change came when I realized it's not conversion therapy to learn to love your body. And I thought that would have been a great quote for a book called Love Thy Body. But see, even secular people are starting to say transgenderism rests on a low view of the body. They sometimes say body hatred. Transgenderism rests on body hatred. Why are our young girls, especially, because the greater numbers of girls now, why are young girls hating their bodies so badly? Why are they hating being girls? Anyway, I just thought it was really cool. And there was another one too. She was a little older. I think she was like 15 when she transitioned, and then detransitioned at 19. And she said, everybody applauded her when she transitioned at first. When she went from girl to boy, she got a lot of applause. She got a party. She got supported. When she detransitioned, she lost all her friends, and which was tough. And she got called names, and she got attacked on Facebook and so on. And then she said, she was asked, what would be your advice to a girl who's facing this issue of whether to transition or not? And she said, if I could teach just one girl to love her body, this will all be worth it. So you see, you're beginning to see that is the core issue.
Right.
Recognizing the beauty and significance and purpose of your body.
So Nancy, as we wrap up, I have one last question as we kind of just put all this together. And then if you had anything that you wanted to add, feel free to do so before we tie the knot. As a cultural worldview expert, I know that you have lots of hope about ultimate redemption, restoration taking place. As you see what's happening in our country right now, what's your gut telling you about the state of America? What's going down here? I mean, if you could be, a prophet and give a voice to what we need to do, what we need to prepare ourselves for in a time such as this, what would you say?
Pretty much what you said earlier, which is that we really need to understand the secular worldviews. We have not been doing that.
Yeah.
The dominant force in any culture tends not to pay attention to the minority. And for a long time, Christianity was dominant,
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, it did not pay attention to the secular worldviews that were developing. And then so they developed and they developed and they took over the schools and they developed and they took over the universities, and they developed some more and took over Hollywood. And all of a sudden now we're facing that secular worldviews are pretty much deeply rooted in all of our major social institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they become much more difficult to dislodge and to even work with, because these days, depending on where you're living and working, you could lose your job for not complying. So it's much more difficult. Some fields, there are secular people actively working to eliminate Christians, like gynecology. If you won't perform abortions, you don't belong in this field. And the same with transgender surgeries.
Mm-hmm.
If you are personally against the idea of trying to change a woman into a man or vice versa, you don't belong in this field, you will be told. People are starting to outright say that. So we are at a very, I think we're at a very dangerous point.
Mm-hmm.
Where we are, unless we learn how to really engage the secular worldviews and start answering their questions. It's not enough to say the Bible says. You could get along with that maybe, a generation ago.
Yeah, exactly.
My parents' generation, that's kind of how they, which is why, and by the way, Bobby, which is why I lost my faith in high school, because that's all I got, right? I started asking, how do we know Christianity is true? That's all. How do we know Christianity is true? And I talked to a Christian college professor, and he said, I asked him point blank, why are you a Christian? He said, works for me.
Mm.
What? You teach at a college and that's all you have?
Yeah.
And I had a chance to talk to a Christian seminary dean, and I thought I would get a more substantial answer. And all he said was, don't worry, we all have doubts sometimes.
Mm.
Like it was a psychological phase and I would outgrow it.
Yeah.
So I decided if Christianity doesn't have any answers, I need to set it aside and start a search for truth. It's up to me, I guess, to find out what the truth is. So that's how I got into philosophy, by the way. See, people think, oh, I was a natural intellectual from the beginning. No, it's because I started saying, well, if Christianity is not true, what is? And
right.
who even talks about these issues? Who talks about, is there truth? Is there meaning to life? is the foundation for ethics. What does it mean to be human? I think philosophers do. Isn't that what philosophers supposed to do? Isn't that their job?
That's right. Yes, that's right. No, it's so true. I mean, it's amazing. It's like I found myself, trying to get two questions answered. What do I do with my guilt? What's the purpose of life? Christianity answered that. Then I went to Bible college to understand my Christianity. Then I went and did a master's of theology to help me to understand my Bible. Then I did apologetics degree to help me to do my theology. Then I ended up in a PhD in philosophy to help me to understand apologetics. And then I was back at mystery again going, oh my goodness. So the full circle that this will take us on is so interesting. And I just love all the things that you've shared, Nancy. I mean, there was a time where the culture and the church shared the same values. They no longer do. And you can see, I like to use the language of rejection, then tolerance, acceptance, celebration, rejection. And it looks like this. You take divorce, or you take abortion. There was a time where the culture would reject those things.
Oh, I see.
But then it began to tolerate it. Then it began to accept it. Then it celebrated it, like divorce parties. And now it rejects you if you hold fast to a traditional marriage view. And that trajectory makes it all the more important for us to understand how we got to this place. And you, Nancy Pearcey, have helped me so much through the years. You are one of my favorite authors, literally one of my apologetic heroes. And I just thank you for the time that you have given me on this program. Our guest has been Nancy Pearcey. She is an award-winning author, Finding Truth, Total Truth, Saving Leonardo, Love Thy Body. She's a professor at Houston Baptist University, and she is a worldview, first-rate thinking expert. Be sure to follow her. Nancy, is there anything that you would want to add before we wrap up that we missed in our time together?
Yeah, I wanted to say one thing. As you left people, I think, maybe with a little bit of uncertainty about where the end is when you said you went to theology and apologetics. And, we don't want to leave people with the idea that this is a never-ending search, and that you'll never get answers. So my story finished when I went to L'Abri. I went to Francis Schaeffer's ministry, L'Abri, in Switzerland. And that was the first place I had ever encountered apologetics. I was stunned. I had no idea that Christianity could be supported by reasons and arguments and so on. And it took a year and a half. I left. I actually went to L'Abri twice. I left once, and through L'Abri I discovered apologetics. So I continued reading and finally became a Christian. And a year and a half later came back to get really grounded in a good understanding of the Christian worldview. So I think you can, in fact, say you have sufficient knowledge to know that Christianity is true. You don't, you're going to keep studying and you're going to keep learning, but you can have sufficient knowledge to know that it's true.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do. I feel like for me, when I was going through the doubts, I was on a quest for omniscience, and I was just trying to chase down a book. For every book I'd read, there'd be 10 more that I'd have to read, and the snowball kept growing. And I had to renegotiate my faith stance to be able to embrace mystery, to have a faith like a child again, to remember that, hey, I came into this because I trusted in the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ on my behalf, and I needed to go back. And when you can't see your way forward through the windshield, I had the rear view mirror that I could look through of God's faithful hand guiding me all those years. And so in humbling myself and becoming like a child again and embracing some mystery, it was just me surrendering my quest for omniscience. Yet I still love to learn. I still love to grow. And the funny thing is too, Nancy, is on the front side of stepping into the ocean of deep philosophical thought, it created a ton of insecurities. Like, well, how can I be sure we've got this right as Christians? What if I'm wrong? There's all these other things I've never explored. But as I got deeper into it, somehow or another, it got scary. And then now I feel stronger than ever because I've taken the time to look and go, man, all these other worldview options seem so weak compared to this beautiful Christian vision that we have called Christianity.
Yeah, and also there's not really that many options out there. They're all variations on a very few.
Exactly.
Exactly. That was one of Schaeffer's arguments. He said you've got a personal beginning or a non-personal beginning. Okay. Once you say that you have to have a personal beginning in order to explain why we are personal beings, that rules out the vast majority of Darwinism, materialism, Nietzsche, rationalism, empiricism, and all kinds of isms. You don't even have to go there because they don't start with a personal beginning. There are very few that start with a personal beginning. So that helped me a lot too. I didn't get quite so overwhelmed because at L'Abri I learned, well, there's a couple basic categories and they're all variations on those categories. So
yes.
that helps you sort them through.
Yeah, and that's what's so great about L'Abri and what you do, Nancy, is you were able to have kind of a big box view to begin with. Like I was put in this tight little legalistic Bible college box that was just constricting, and I began to think my way out of it. And a lot of times people think, oh, if I leave this tight little box, I leave Christianity. But if we can help them from the beginning to understand that the box of Christianity is a lot bigger than people might realize, and that we're giving ourselves to mere Christianity, then there's some room to think. But we can almost give people, I mean, heck, they can become a Christian at a Wednesday night service, go to membership on a Sunday, and then they're signing off on Sunday on a doctrinal statement that's 20 doctrines long, and they don't even know what they just signed. And now they're expected to kind of stay within that tight box. And then if they're thinkers, they go through their life and start bumping up against that. And so what you got from, Francis Schaeffer was a big box to begin with. And I think that it shows how wonderful that is. So Nancy, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know our audience is going to be so blessed by this. We're going to turn this into podcasts, short videos. We will leverage our interview with you to turn it into the most amount of material to bless as many people as possible. Thank you again, and everybody have a great night, and God bless from Southern California.
Thank you, Bobby.
You bet.